I'm at a job site today where I've got to do some repairs. This is an older house, probably built in the 40s or 50s. It's all plaster. And what we have here in the ceiling is a crack. It's pretty straight. Let's go straight along. It turns 16 inches and goes along the whole ceiling. I'm gonna be trying to figure out exactly how to correct this, because the cracks like this quite often come back. I can see that this has been patched before, although it doesn't look like it has had tape put on it before. But I want to do a good job patching. I'm not going to just patch the surface. I'm going to dig into it and try to strengthen it. It went pretty well with my utility knife, but it's such a hard plaster, I'm having a hard time getting deep enough. So I'm just gonna try something. I'm gonna try my drywall saw. Now that I've got it more kind of V'd out, I'm just gonna stick the blade in there. This stiff saw works pretty well, gouging out that really hard plaster, so I get a nice deep V-groove. Okay, I've got the crack all gouged out. You can see that I've got it going in there quite deep. Okay, I've had another idea about this crack here. I found all the ceiling joists. In other words, I just took a nail and I tapped it into that crack until I found where the ceiling joists were. Then I just measured over 16 inches on the center, put a mark. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually screwing the plaster tight. I'm taking 1 5/8 drywall screws and just tightening up that plaster, just as an additional safety, just to try to prevent this from coming back, because this type of crack really is prone to returning. What I'm doing here is brushing in a plaster bonding agent. This helps keep that really dry plaster moist so it doesn't dry out my setting compound too quickly. Now that I have everything V'd out, fastened properly, and a bonding agent applied, I'm ready to fill that gap with a setting compound. I mix it up nice and thick. So this ceiling crack, I only have pre-filled. I haven't put any tape over it or anything yet. But what I'm going to use for that is I'm going to use some fiber fuse. I have a 6-inch wide roll of fiber fuse. This is the fiberglass matte tape. This gets embedded in an all-purpose heavyweight compound. So I'm going to use that because it's very strong, and I like it because it's nice and wide. It's going to help me to be able to feather this crack out wide and get it nice and flat. The compound that I'm going to embed it in is the all-purpose heavyweight compound. I call it heavyweight, but I guess it's just called all-purpose. I call it heavyweight because it's heavy. This bucket weighs, over 60 pounds. And that's nice and strong. That's gonna give me the most strength. I'm trying to prevent this crack from coming back. So I'm using a very strong compound, and with the fiber fuse, a very strong tape. I've got the compound in my pan that I have thinned down fairly thin, but not so thin that it's running off my knife. And then I'm just going to put a nice layer right over the crack in this ceiling. I'm going probably 8 inches wide or so. Not putting it on too thick, but thick enough so I'm not leaving any dry spots behind so there won't be any dry spots behind the tape. Now, I just take the fiber fuse. I'm just going to send it right over the crack. It's easy to cut. I'm just taking my taping knife and just cutting it. That's as much as I can reach right now off the bench. And I'm just going to embed it with my taping knife. Push it in nice and tight. It's very easy to embed because it pushes right into the compound. The excess compound not only comes out from around the edges, but it also goes right through the fiber fuse. So it's really easy to get flat and nice and tight to that ceiling. All right, so everything is nice and dry today. You can see that I feathered it in a little bit, and I'm going to give it a quick sanding and then put another coat of compound. Actually, this coat will be the final coat of compound. Okay, I've started to put the finish coat on. This is an area that I've already applied the finish coat. What I'm doing is I'm just applying a generous amount of compound and then removing it with my 12-inch knife, feathering the edges in and filling any little imperfections or hollow areas as I go. So this crack that started out, just as maybe half-inch wide crack, the finished tape seam for the repair is probably going to be in about 2 feet wide. Okay, today is a sanding day. Things are looking pretty good. It's gonna go pretty quickly. You can see everything looks nice and flat. Not gonna be a lot of sanding really. What I use for sanding is pretty much a pole sander. But I like the round pole sander. I have a 220 grit paper on it, and I also use these sanding sponges for most of my touch-up work. So the rough sanding with the pole sander and the touch-up with a sanding sponge. What I use most of the time for the rough sanding is actually this electric sander. It's got a rotating head and it's hooked to this dust extractor. So this eliminates a good portion of the dust, but of course not all of it. And you still do have the touch-up sanding to do, so I always use that sanding sponge. And after I use the rotating sander, the electric sander, I just go over quickly with the pole sander just to clean it up a little bit and get rid of any swirl marks that might create. And there you have it, a nicely sanded ceiling, all ready for primer and paint.